All right, so President Joe Biden is continuing to double down and triple down on his support for the single worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, as just a couple days ago we learned that he is sending even more military hardware to the Saudis as they continue their ongoing blockade and bombing of Yemen. So just a little bit of details here. They say from Al Jazeera, U.S. sends Patriot interceptors to Saudi to ease tensions, reports. So a little bit of details. They say the Biden administration has transferred a significant number of Patriot anti-missile interceptors to Saudi Arabia, fulfilling an urgent request from the kingdom that has become a point of contention in relations between Washington and Riyadh, according to reports. And they say the officials did not give a number of how many Patriot interceptors had been sent, but told the AP that the decision was in line with President Joe Biden's promise that America will have the backs of our friends in the region. Okay, the same Joe Biden who, when he was running on the campaign trail, vowed to make the Saudis a pariah. Okay, now he's turning around and acting as if it was his promise to have the backs of our friends in the region. Okay, just a complete 180 reversal from what you were saying on the campaign trail. Now, this isn't the only promise that he's broken in, relation to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, but we'll get to the next one here in a minute. But again, calling them our friends in the region, okay? The same Saudi Arabia that just within the last couple of weeks has thrown up like 18 different middle fingers to the United States and specifically to Joe Biden. So this was on literally the same exact day that we decided to send them these Patriot interceptor equipment, okay? Saudi Arabia says it's not responsible for high oil prices. Now, obviously, they're not entirely responsible. You could blame, OPEC entirely. You could blame partially the war in Russia. You could, majority, in my opinion, blame U.S. multinational corporations that are using this ongoing crisis in order to inflate their profit margins. There's a whole host of, different groups that you could blame for high oil prices right now. But Saudi Arabia is certainly one of them in the sense that they could release some of their strategic reserves, or they could ramp up production in order to, release some of that into the global market and bring down the cost per barrel. Okay, they do have 100%, they have control in order to do that. They're just choosing not to. Again, basically just throwing up a middle finger to Joe Biden. Okay, so this wasn't the only example. We also had this Saudi Arabia to mull oil sales in the Chinese yuan. So basically just threatening to, try to de-link their currency as it has been for years now from the US dollar and try to form some sort of closer bonds with China. Now, this is mostly a symbolic and an empty threat in terms of the immediate future and the logistics of this actually happening, but it's still a symbolic middle finger to Joe Biden. Now, finally, we had this one, which was really just the cherry on top of all of this. Saudi and Emirati leaders decline calls with Biden during the Ukraine crisis. And what was their reasoning? Well, they say Persian Gulf monarchies have signaled that they won't help ease surging oil prices unless Washington supports them in Yemen and elsewhere. Okay, so supports them in Yemen and elsewhere. This is where I get kind of confused because Joe Biden, if you've been following my channel, you would know this. Joe Biden has been supporting the Saudis and the UAE in their continuing offensive campaign in Yemen, okay, which is, again, arguably the single worst humanitarian crisis on the planet. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of innocent children that in the immediate future are at risk of starving to death due to the Saudi blockade of Yemen. So, this is the single worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, and Joe Biden has been helping them. So we're not even really getting, or we're really just getting the worst of both worlds when it comes to our relations with the Saudis right now, right? They're not helping us out when it comes to lowering oil prices by releasing their, reserves into the global market and ramping up production. So we're not getting cheaper oil from them. And on the flip side of that, they're also not satisfied with the amount that we're helping them in their genocide of the Yemeni people, even though Joe Biden, again, has been helping them substantially. They just don't think it's been enough. So just as another reminder of some of the broken promises of Joe Biden on Yemen. So remember when he said that he was going to end U.S. support for offensive military operations against Yemen? So I told you guys immediately when we learned this that it was complete bullshit, okay? They were just putting this language out there of we're not going to support their offensive things, but we're just going to support their defensive capabilities. It was complete nonsense. They were essentially just recategorizing every action that is taken by Saudi Arabia to be defensive. And just as a reminder in terms of just how disingenuous this is, here from the Brookings Institute, they say, unfortunately, Biden's approach is fatally flawed, saying that the president stated that he would end U.S. support for offensive operations in Yemen, and yet the Saudi-led war on Yemen is, by definition, an offensive operation. Saudi Arabia is bombing and blockading another country, and between March of 2015 and July of 2021, the Saudis conducted a minimum of 23,251 air raids States, which killed or injured 18,616 civilians, and the Houthis, known formally as Ansarullah, launched missiles in retaliation. But if Saudi airstrikes ceased, the Houthis would have little reason to provoke their powerful neighbor. And as long as the U.S. materially and rhetorically backs the Saudis' war of choice, Biden's assertion that the U.S. would end support for offensive operations is a lie. So it was obvious that it was a lie because, again, as they're saying here, the entire Saudi operation in Yemen is by definition offensive. Okay, so there is no comparison here. Also, in terms of just the military firepower, okay, we're talking about the single richest country, arguably, in the Middle East that is backed by the single most powerful military in the world, the United States, as well as the richest country in the world, the United States, that is fighting a war against arguably the poorest country in the Middle East, okay, in Yemen. So it's just a completely disproportionate war that's happening. You could, I think, arguably call it a genocide. You have hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians that are at risk of dying in the immediate future due to this ongoing campaign. So it's complete bullshit, both from the perspective of the Joe Biden administration, who very clearly lied about this on multiple different fronts and what he was actually planning to do as the president, but not just in terms of him lying, but the ongoing war crimes that we are complicit in right now. I mean, this isn't something that, is in the history, right? This is something that we just saw a couple months ago as a perfect example here from Amnesty International. They say U.S.-made weapon used in airstrike that killed scores in escalation of Saudi-led coalition attacks. And they say the Saudi-led coalition used a precision-guided munition made in the United States in last week's airstrike on a detention center in Sadr in northwestern Yemen, which, according to Doctors Without Borders, killed at least 80 people and injured over 200, Amnesty International said today. And the laser-guided bomb used in the attack, manufactured by U.S. defense company Raytheon, okay? Again, I'm going to remind you guys that Joe Biden's Pentagon chief, Lloyd Austin, formerly just sat on the board of Raytheon and got $1 million payout as he was leaving to go lead the Pentagon. Okay, so weapons coming from Raytheon that are being used to kill dozens of people in Yemen, and is the latest piece in a wider web of evidence of the use of U.S. manufactured weapons in incidents that could amount to war crimes. So again, we're doing this actively. We are supporting an ongoing blockade that is starving hundreds of thousands of civilians. We are continuing to provide them with military, offensive, and defensive support, whichever word you want to use. There is no difference in this because it is an offensive campaign being led by the Saudis. So we're continuing to support them as they continue to starve the people of Yemen and commit widespread war crimes. Now, again, some important details here in terms of the leverage that we have over them, right? Because we're seeing this entire picture of how badly Joe Biden is fucking up from every single different angle here. Because again, you're not even getting the trade-off of the deal with the devil of getting cheap oil from Saudi Arabia, which is supposed to be the entire reason of us putting up with their human rights abuses, right? Even in the mind of some sort of a U.S. imperialist or a war hawk or something like that, even they understand that this relationship, we're not allies with the Saudis because they're good friends of ours or because they're geopolitically or ideologically in line with us. We're doing it because they are a reliable source of cheap oil, or at least that's what people have nominally thought during our relationship with them. Now, clearly that's not the case. If when oil prices are starting to spike on the global market, they're basically, again, giving us the middle finger and saying, well, I guess there's nothing we can do about it. So we're not getting the cheap oil from them, and we're continuing to be complicit in their ongoing genocide in Yemen. So you're getting the worst of both worlds here. Now, what could Joe Biden actually do about this entire situation? Well, important data point here that of the imports, the arms imports that Saudi Arabia is relying on to continue their war in Yemen, which is the vast majority of their weapons are imported, but 73% of Saudi Arabia's arms imports came from the US and 13% from the UK. So in other words, almost 90% of their arms exports, which is essentially how their entire military is functioning right now, almost 90% of their arms exports are under our control. It's either coming from the United States or one of our closest allies in the UK. So this is a substantial amount of leverage that Joe Biden could use to force them to do either one of two things. You could either force them to release more oil into the global market to lower oil prices, or you could, more importantly, force them to end their genocide in Yemen that you are currently aiding and abetting. But Joe Biden is not choosing to do either of those things. He's choosing to continue to double down in supporting their war in Yemen, while also not getting any hard trade-offs in terms of lowering the price of oil in the global market. So just completely delusional and disastrous foreign policy. But just to sum it up here for you guys, I thought this was a great breakdown that I'll link down below from the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft on this. So they say here the Yemen war in numbers, the Saudi escalation, and U.S. complicity. So it's not even just that the Saudi-led, intervention in Yemen or war in Yemen is ongoing. It's actually dramatically escalated since Joe Biden took office, and I'll show you guys a graph that breaks that down here in a second. But they say here in the executive summary that Yemen's humanitarian crisis demonstrates the consequences and risks of the American decision to enable Saudi and Emirati military action against Yemen. And they say this decision reflects a flawed calculus, the belief that by supporting Arab security partners, the U.S. can prevent them from moving into China's or Russia's orbit. And as recent events have demonstrated, America's partners in the Middle East are hedging despite the Biden administration's extensive support. For example, when the UN Security Council voted in February to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the UAE abstained, and America's Gulf partners hope to strengthen their relationship with Moscow and Beijing while continuing to reap the benefits of Washington's largesse. So in other words, they're getting our military support, they're getting our diplomatic protection, but they're not giving us anything in return. And while they're doing this, they're also forming closer relationships to Moscow and to China. So even again, from the perspective of an American imperialist, this is completely delusional foreign policy. But they continue saying, American involvement in supporting the Saudi-led military action against the Houthis in Yemen, rather than helping to resolve the conflict, as the Biden administration claims, is prolonging and escalating the violence. And they say, by continuing to support the Saudi and Emirati aggression, the U.S. not only deepens its complicity in the slaughter of Yemen's civilian population, it also risks getting dragged into a more active participation in the war on behalf of these two Arab security partners. And they finish off here saying, instead of escalating U.S. involvement in defending the Saudis and Emiratis from the consequences of their aggression, the Biden administration should suspend all arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE until they end their military intervention in Yemen. So again, no matter which way that you want to look at this, right? If you want to look at this from the humanitarian angle and say we should use this moment to use our leverage over them and our military and logistical support that we give to them and our aid to them in continuing their ongoing war in Yemen, you could use it to end the war in Yemen, or you could use it to have them force them to release more oil into the global market in order to tamp down those oil prices. But again, Joe Biden is not doing either of these things. So you're getting the worst of both worlds, where you're supporting and aiding and abetting an ongoing genocide, and you're continuing to get completely dicked over when it comes to the politics of this domestically, as Joe Biden's approval rating continues to tank with high gas prices. He's not really doing anything about it, and you're continuing to get dicked domestically, politically, but also embarrassed on the international stage because you're not willing to stand up to this petrostate monarchy dictatorship of these Saudis, who are essentially just laughing in your face and throwing up middle fingers to you left and right, while you continue to bend over and beg them to continue doing it.